So when I think of picking a jig trailer, I really go back to look at the kind of jig that I'm fishing. And I pretty much, for me, I lump that into two different styles. You know, if I'm pitching, flipping, casting, that's all kind of one group to me. And then if I'm swimming a jig, you know, and really if you look at that, it's about the presentation. For those flipping, you know, kind of presentations, you're primarily fishing a vertical presentation. Sure, if you're casting a jig, dragging it along the bottom, it's kind of horizontal, but a swim jig is definitely a horizontal presentation. So it's, you know, it's throwing it back and it's fishing it to you. Where when I'm pitching or flipping, I'm pitching it to a target. I may fish it on the bottom, fish it, you know, I may fish it a foot, I may fish it 5 or 10 feet, but I'm mostly fishing that in a place, you know, on the bottom. Where that swimming jig, it may be near the bottom, but it also may be near the surface. So I look at that much more of a horizontal presentation, and it's going to make my trailer selection, you know, a little different accordingly. So I'm going to start. I think the swimming jig is probably a little bit more simple in my trailer selection. So I'm going to start with it, and you know, the particular jigs as well. For me, I always use a Terminator Jig. We've got a new heavy-duty swim jig that is just an excellent swim jig. You can certainly use this with fluorocarbon line, but it's definitely built to be able to hold up with braided line. It's got a really good heavy-duty hook, a good weed guard, a great trailer keeper on there. But I'm going to use, I've really got 3 different trailer styles that I'll use on that heavy-duty swim jig. One is a boot tail swim bait, you know, just something that's got a nice bait fish profile. That's the Bass Pro Speed Shad is what that particular one is, but a boot tail swim bait is one that I'll use. The next is a swimming chunk. That is a swimming elite chunk, is one that I use on the back of a swim jig as well. And then last is just a real, you know, high action crawdad style trailer, something that's got a lot of flap, moves a lot of water, and that's going to be one that I use a lot in really dirty water, is that particular trailer. Or if I'm really wanting to have a lot of lift. That's when you look at any trailer style, a few things to consider is the amount of vibration that's going to put off, but also the amount of lift that it's going to put off. That swimming elite chunk truly has the most or the least amount of resistance. I mean, it is the most streamlined, you know, not a lot of big flappy appendages. It doesn't catch a lot of water. Even the Speed Shad with that boot tail, it's going to catch a decent amount of water, and certainly that crawl there, it catches a lot of water and really has a lot of movement. So that swimming elite chunk, that's what I'm going to use a lot around docks. I have had so much success swimming a white jig around docks, especially around the shad spawn, with that swimming elite chunk. On a good day, I've went through, there's 5 in a pack of these things. I've went through 2 or 3 packs of those in a day. You know, really just in the morning when that swim jig bite can really be on fire around that shad spawn. But I like that because it doesn't have a lot of resistance. I can move the bait through the water quickly and generate a reaction bite with it. But if I'm, you know, in places where I want to have that bait held up higher in the water column and, you know, really keep it up higher, that's when I'm going to go either with that Speed Shad or with that crawl style bait. For me, I'll lend myself more towards the Speed Shad if I'm on, you know, like a bait fish type deal, and something more like a shad or a shiner, a light colored bait fish. That's when I'm going to go with that. If I feel like I'm fishing more, trying to imitate a brim, bluegill, that type of stuff, I'm going to go with that crawl. I mean, yeah, that's a crawl style trailer, but I think of that as imitating a bluegill better than I do just something with that boot tail on the back of it. I feel like bluegill put off a little bit more vibration when they swim than a shad does. So that's why I'm going to go with that crawl style trailer, something that puts off more vibration. And again, will hold that bait up in the water, hold it up in the water column a lot better. So that's kind of on the swim jig side. And then moving over to the, you know, what you could say a flipping jig or skipping jig, casting jig. I use the same jig for all that stuff. I used to even swim this jig a lot, but that's a Terminator Pros jig. It's a great all-around jig. A 3/8, half, and 3/4 are pretty much the sizes that I carry in that. But I've definitely got a good many trailers that that I'll vary to fish with that. Most common, most of the time, if I'm flipping that jig, flipping, pitching, whether it's grass, rock, wood, whatever, the thing I probably use on it at least half the time, if not more than that, is just a standard chunk. I can't tell you how many bass I've caught on a chunk style trailer on the back of any jig, but that's just a Bass Pro Elite chunk, the regular size. That is my go-to trailer. If I was going to tell you to buy one trailer, that's the one it would be. The next one would be just the Elite Chunk Junior. It's just a little bit smaller profile. If you're fishing places where you're fishing for a lot of smallmouth or spotted bass, or just those fish are keyed in on really small crawfish, trimming that skirt down, kind of like what I've got on that one, trimming that skirt down, putting on an Elite Chunk Junior is a great way to really make a smaller profile and get a lot of bites. Next, kind of working my way up in size, would be a double tail grub. Really, for me, putting a double tail grub on the back of a jig, and this actually work well on the swim jig too at times, but a double tail grub, if I'm pitching a jig, it pretty much is a fall deal. I don't use it any other time of the year. I don't know why, but late summer, early fall, like August, September, maybe into October, if it's still pretty warm out, is the time of the year when I really like a double tail grub on the back of a jig to flip. It doesn't have much resistance, but it does have a good bit of movement. And I can put that on a 1/2 ounce jig and get a faster fall than I will with an Elite chunk. But I've got considerably more movement. So that's why that's when and where that I like to use that double tail grub on the back of a jig. And then really the last couple, these are kind of more specific for just a particular scenario. If I'm fishing a lake and my main deal is actually skipping that jig, trying to skip it under boat docks, overhanging trees, whatever it is, but I want to be fishing a jig and I need to be able to skip it as far as I possibly can, that's when I'm going to go with either a river bug or a bull hog as a trailer. Both of these I'm going to cut down a little bit. I'll cut maybe a 1/4 inch or so off of the top of these to put those up on the jig. But if you look at the body of both of these, like look at that river bug for example, it's really flat, and what that does, it's got a wide place on it, but it's being really flat. When I rig that up on a jig, I'm going to rig it like this. Okay, so what that will do, that gives me a really big, wide, flat surface for that jig to actually skip on. And you can take the same jig, you could take this, a 1/2 ounce Pros jig with that little small Elite Chunk Junior and try to skip it, pull that chunk off, put a river bug on it, rigged up the way that I just showed you, and it's going to skip twice as far with that river bug, no question about it, and get a lot less backlashes because of it. So if I'm skipping, I'm going to use one of those, the river bug if I don't want a lot of extra action, and the bull hog if I do want a little bit of extra action on the fall or anything. So that's just that's most of the trailers pretty much that I use for swim jigs as well as flipping jigs. Football jigs would be a whole nother category. Not too much different there. A twin tail grub a lot on a football jig, as well as a bull hog if I want something with a lot of bulk and a lot of movement on the back of it. But that's pretty much my jig selection and the trailers that I put on them, and it works all across the country, from Florida to New York to Oklahoma or California. Even if you go out that far, that stuff will work anywhere you go throughout the country.